Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a look at those fascinating, sometimes frustrating patterns that we
Yeah.
all fall into in our relationships. We're
Mhm.
going deep into Eric Bernays' Games People Play. You know, the book that kind of flips the script on how we view our
It
relationships.
really does.
So if you're listening,
Yeah.
you're probably interested in understanding, the psychology behind those kind of subtle games,
Yeah.
those exchanges that keep playing out even when you're left feeling a little stuck.
Exactly.
By the end of this deep dive, though, you'll have a whole new perspective on those patterns.
New lens.
Yeah, it's a new lens.
Bunny gives us this framework that's both insightful and a bit unnerving, to be honest.
Yeah.
It exposes those hidden motives that we're often not even aware of.
Right from the start,
Yeah.
he hits us with this idea of strokes. And it's almost like these
Yeah.
fundamental units of social recognition. And he's saying that we all crave these,
We do.
have this hunger for connection.
Stimulus hunger.
Yeah.
It's as primal as our need for food. And once those fundamental strokes are met, we are then faced with the challenge of structuring our time
Right.
and figuring out what to do with ourselves and with each other.
And that's where things get really interesting, because he breaks down our interactions into these three main categories: activities, rituals, and pastimes. And
It's a
then
big one.
games.
Yes, the
So
game
it's that.
activities are fairly straightforward. They're our work
Yeah.
on the external world, tasks, actions that keep us busy. And then we move into the realm of rituals and pastimes.
Right.
Socially acceptable ways of connecting, following a script, engaging in that small talk, weather talk.
Right. Very surface level.
Yes,
But it's the games that Burnell really digs into. They have a whole other layer of complexity, don't they?
they do.
These aren't just simple interactions. They're patterns with hidden motives and predictable payoffs. And as you said, those payoffs aren't always what we expect.
They're not, no.
No.
And what's fascinating is that these games, they often operate beneath our conscious awareness.
Well, absolutely.
We're playing them without even realizing it, caught in these repetitive cycles, and it can leave us feeling frustrated or even hurt.
Absolutely. So before we get into the specifics of those games, Byrne introduces this model of the human psyche with three ego states: parent, adult, and child. It's almost as if we're shifting between these different modes of being
Yeah.
as we interact.
Constantly shifting.
That's-
It's such a brilliant model because it helps us to understand the dynamics at play in our communication. So think of the parent ego state
Yeah.
as that internalized voice of authority.
Okay.
All those rules and shoulds that we've absorbed from our upbringing.
Like that inner critic.
Yes, but also that nurturing side that
Yeah.
wants to guide and protect.
Oh, for sure.
Then you have the adult, which is our rational, objective self,
Yeah.
the part of us that's grounded in the here and now,
Okay.
processing information, making logical decisions.
Right. It's almost like a mediator between the two, right?
Yeah.
Between the parent and the child. And speaking of the child, that's where, our emotions, spontaneity, and creativity reside. The part of us that just wants to play, explore,
Mhm.
experience the world with that sense of wonder.
Right. And all three of these ego states are active in our interactions.
Yeah.
It's like a dance between these different parts of ourselves.
Mhm.
Depending on which state is dominant at any given moment,
Mhm.
it shapes how we communicate, how we respond.
And that brings us to Braine's concept of transactions, which he describes as the basic units of social interaction.
The exchange of strokes between people.
Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not as simple as just giving and receiving recognition, right?
Not at all. He makes this distinction between what he calls complementary transactions and cross transactions.
Got it.
Complementary transactions flow smoothly, like two people are on the same wavelength, ego states are aligned, communication is clear and effective.
So, like, if I'm coming from my adult ego state, asking you a question about a work project, and you respond from your adult state, providing the information that I need, that would be a complementary transaction.
Precisely.
Okay.
But then you have cross transactions. This is where things get a bit messy.
Yeah,
This is when the ego states aren't aligned.
right.
Miscommunication, misunderstandings, even conflict.
Like when a parent is trying to reason with a child who's throwing a tantrum, the parent is coming from that rational adult, and the child is firmly entrenched in their emotional child state.
Exactly.
And those cross transactions oftentimes set the stage for those games
Yeah.
that we're talking about.
Yes. And then there's another layer that Bernie adds, ulterior transactions.
Oh boy.
This is where there's a hidden message beneath the surface, a psychological subtext that's
Yeah.
driving the interaction.
So that's where it gets really intriguing. Berno uses this example of a salesman. saying, this one is better, but you can't afford it.
Mm.
So, on the surface, he's seemingly speaking to the customer's adult, just presenting the facts, but underneath, he's appealing to the customer's child.
Mm.
That part of us that, desires what it can't have.
Exactly. Classic example of an ulterior transaction.
Yeah.
Highlights how these seemingly innocuous exchanges can actually be driven by much deeper, often unconscious motives.
So let's talk about those games, because that's what we're all here for, right?
Great.
What exactly makes a pattern of interaction a game in Byrne's view?
A game in Byrne's terms
Yeah.
is a series of transactions with a concealed motive and a predictable payoff.
Yeah.
It's a repetitive pattern we get caught in, often without even realizing it.
And that payoff,
Mhm.
not always positive,
No, not always positive.
often reinforces those negative beliefs about ourselves or the world.
Yeah.
So it's not just about
Yeah.
winning or losing, like in a traditional game.
Hmm.
It's more about these underlying psychological dynamics
Yeah.
that are driving our behavior.
Yeah, exactly. And Byrne provides this brilliant framework for analyzing games, breaking them down into their key elements.
Okay.
He talks about the thesis of the game, which is the basic premise or the pattern of
Okay.
the interaction. Then there's the aim. What is the player ultimately trying to achieve? What's
Right.
the hidden payoff?
Okay.
He also discusses the different roles that people take on in these games, like the persecutor, the victim, the rescuer, and, of course, he provides specific examples of games, like the classic "If It Weren't For You," often seen in relationships.
Right. If it weren't for you,
IWFY,
a WFY.
as it's often abbreviated.
Right.
It perfectly illustrates how a seemingly simple interaction can actually be driven by these complex unconscious motives.
Okay. So let's break down IWFY using Byrne's framework. What's the basic thesis of this game?
In IWFY, one person, often the wife, feels restricted or limited by their partner.
Okay.
She might say things like, "If it weren't for you, I could travel the world. If it weren't for you, I could pursue my dream career."
So on the surface, it seems like she's blaming her husband for holding her back. But is that really what's going on?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. The real aim of the game is often not about blaming the partner, but about seeking reassurance.
Okay.
By putting the responsibility on her husband, she avoids having to confront her own fears or insecurities
I see.
about taking risks or pursuing her goals.
So it's almost like she's setting herself up to fail. She's choosing a partner who will reinforce this belief
Yeah.
that she's restricted.
Yes. And that's what makes this so fascinating. The wife may have subconsciously chosen a domineering husband, precisely because it allows her to play this game, to maintain this belief that she's being held back.
So the husband, in a way,
Yeah,
is enabling her to avoid taking responsibility for her own life.
exactly.
Like a vicious cycle.
And that's the trap of these games. They can keep us stuck in these repetitive cycles that ultimately prevent us from achieving what we truly desire.
It really highlights the importance of becoming aware of these patterns and understanding those deeper motivations
Yeah,
that are at play in our interactions.
absolutely.
Like we're puppets on strings.
Yeah.
Playing out these predetermined roles without even realizing it.
Right.
What's really mind-blowing is that Byrne suggests these patterns often stem from decisions that we made very early in life.
This is where his concept of the life script comes in.
Okay.
He argues that we develop this unconscious plan, this blueprint for how our lives will unfold, based on our early childhood experiences, especially those with our parents.
It's almost as if we're writing our own narratives before we even fully understand what a narrative is.
Right.
And these games become part of that script.
Exactly. The games we play often serve to confirm those early decisions, those core beliefs we formed about ourselves and the world. It's a way of staying in our comfort zone, even if that zone is filled with conflict and negativity.
So if these games are so deeply ingrained, how do we even begin to recognize them? Like, what are some clues that we might be caught in one of these repetitive patterns?
One of the biggest red flags is recurring conflicts.
Okay.
If you find yourself having the same argument with your partner, your boss, or even your friends over and over again, chances are there's a game at play.
So it's not just about the external conflict, is it?
Yeah.
It's about those internal feelings as well.
Absolutely. Pay attention to those recurring negative emotions.
Like-
If you're constantly feeling frustrated, resentful, or victimized in certain situations, that's another sign that you might be caught in a game.
So awareness is the first step.
Yeah.
But then what? How do we actually break free from these patterns? Byrne talks about the concept of antithesis as a way to disrupt these games. What does that involve?
Antithesis is about refusing to play the game, or at least refusing to play it in the way that you usually do.
Okay.
It's about throwing the other player off balance.
Interest.
disrupting their expectations, and ultimately breaking the cycle.
So let's go back to that example of if it weren't for you. How might antithesis play out in that scenario?
Okay, so imagine the husband. Instead of reinforcing the wife's belief that he's holding her back, respond with something like, you know what, you're absolutely right. You should go for that dream. I'll support you all the way.
Wow. That would definitely shake things up. It's like he's pulling the rug out from under her, taking away your excuse
Yeah.
for not pursuing her goal.
Exactly. And while it might initially trigger anxiety or even anger in the wife, it also creates an opportunity for genuine change.
Good.
It breaks the cycle of the game and forces her to confront her own fears and take responsibility for her choices.
But wouldn't that be a difficult thing for the husband to do, especially if he's used to, being in control?
It would definitely require a shift in his own thinking, a
Yeah.
willingness to step outside of his familiar role. But ultimately, it's about supporting his wife's growth and creating a more authentic and fulfilling relationship.
So antithesis isn't always easy or comfortable, but it has the potential to be transformative.
And that's the beauty of Bernays' work. It
Yeah.
doesn't just point out the problem, it offers solutions. He outlines a path toward greater autonomy, a way to break free from these games and live more authentically.
And that path involved cultivating 3 key capacities: awareness, spontaneity, and intimacy.
We've already discussed awareness, that ability to see our own patterns and the patterns of others. But then there's spontaneity,
Oh.
that freedom to choose how we respond, rather than reacting in those automatic, programmed ways.
So it's like reclaiming our agency, taking back control of our own lives.
Yes.
And finally, there's intimacy, which Bernays describes as that spontaneous, game-free candidness that comes from a place of genuine connection.
It's about letting go of pretense and those defensive mechanisms, allowing ourselves to be truly seen and known by others.
Isn't it a bit idealistic to think that we can completely eliminate games from our life? I mean, we've been playing them for so long.
Of course, it's a process, a journey. It's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of game-free existence, but about becoming more aware of our patterns and
Wow.
making conscious choices.
Right.
It's about recognizing those moments when we're slipping into a game, choosing to respond differently.
So it's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And even small changes can have a ripple effect, not just in our own lives, but in our relationships as well.
Absolutely. As we become more aware of our own games, we also become more sensitive to the games that others are playing.
That's true.
And that understanding can lead to more compassion and empathy in our interactions.
So let's dive into a few more examples of games that Byrne describes in the book. There's one that really stood out to me. Blemish. What's the dynamic at play in that game?
Blemish is all about finding fault with others, constantly focusing on their flaws, even if they're minor or insignificant.
So like those people
Yeah.
that are always criticizing others' appearance,
Yeah.
their choices, their lifestyle.
Yes.
They can always find something to nitpick.
It's like a defense mechanism, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, a way to deflect attention away from their own insecurities by projecting them onto others.
Oh, totally. And what's the payoff for the blemish player?
A sense of superiority.
Okay.
By putting others down, they feel better about themselves, even if it's just a fleeting moment of ego gratification.
It's sad, really, because it prevents them from forming genuine connections. They're so busy focusing on the negative that they miss out on all the good. What about the game Courtroom? That one sounds particularly dramatic.
Courtroom is essentially about turning every disagreement into a trial,
Oh, wow.
with a plaintiff, a defendant, and a judge. Instead of resolving conflict directly, they bring in a third party to decide who's right and who's wrong.
So it's like they're outsourcing their responsibility to someone else,
Exactly.
avoiding having to face the issue head on.
Avoiding taking ownership of their actions or contributions to the conflict.
And so the aim of the game is to be declared innocent.
Yes.
It's like they need that external validation, that reassurance from someone else, that they're okay, that they're not to blame.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that brings us to another game I think is worth mentioning. Busman's Holiday.
Busman's Holiday.
This one's a bit different in that it's not inherently negative.
Gro?
It's about someone who continues to work or engage in their profession even during their leisure time.
Like a doctor who volunteers at a free clinic on vacation, or a teacher who spends their summer tutoring students. I mean, those are admirable pursuits.
They can be, absolutely. If the motivation is genuine, if it comes from a place of altruism and a desire to serve others, then it's a beautiful thing.
Right.
But it becomes a game when there are ulterior motives involved.
So what would be an example of a busman's holiday gone wrong?
Imagine someone who's constantly boasting about their volunteer work,
Oh, okay.
using it as a way to gain social status
Mm.
or to avoid facing their own emotional issues.
So it becomes less about the service
Yeah.
and more about ego gratification.
Exactly.
It's like they're using their good deeds as a shield to deflect criticism or scrutiny.
Precisely. And it highlights the importance of being mindful of our motivations, even when we're doing things that appear to be selfless or helpful.
It's a good reminder that even our best intentions can sometimes be clouded by these unconscious games that we're playing. Makes
Yeah.
you question,
Yeah.
the motivations behind our actions. Are we acting from a place of genuine generosity?
Yeah.
Or are we subtly trying to gain something for ourselves, even if it's just a pat on the back?
It is a humbling realization. It really underscores the need for self-awareness, that constant questioning of our own motives and intentions.
It's not about judging ourselves. It's about understanding those forces
Right.
that are driving our behavior. But Burnett doesn't just leave us in this introspective spiral, though, does he? He offers a way out.
He does.
He talks about this possibility of achieving greater autonomy, living a more authentic and fulfilling life. What does that actually look like?
Well, it's about moving from that state of reactivity to a state of conscious choice. So instead of being driven by those unconscious scripts and predictable payoffs, we start making deliberate decisions about how we want to interact with the world.
So it's about breaking free from those puppet strings, those ingrained patterns of behavior that keep us stuck in those same old games.
Exactly. And it's a journey, not a destination. We may never completely eliminate all games from our lives,
Right.
but we can become more aware of them, more intentional in our responses, and ultimately more free.
So if we were to distill all of this down to a few key takeaways for our listeners, what would you say are the most essential things to remember from Burndy's work?
First thing that comes to mind is we all play games. It's part of the human experience. It's not about judging ourselves or others for engaging in these patterns, but about becoming aware of them and understanding those underlying dynamics.
It's like shining a light on those hidden motives, those unconscious needs that are driving our behavior once we see them. Then we can start to make different choices.
Right. It's about recognizing those moments when we're slipping into a game, noticing those familiar feelings of frustration or resentment, and then asking ourselves, what am I trying to achieve here? What payoff am I seeking? Is this really serving me?
And then we can.
Yeah.
Start to experiment with those new ways of responding. We can try out those antithesis moves, those unexpected reactions that can disrupt the game, create space for something more genuine and authentic.
And it's not just about changing our external behavior. It's about cultivating those inner capacities for awareness, spontaneity, and intimacy.
Right.
It's about becoming more present, more attuned to our own emotions and the emotions of others.
So as our listeners go about their day, what's one thing that they can do to start applying these insights to their own lives?
I encourage them to just pay attention to the interactions they have, both with themselves and with others. Notice those recurring patterns, those familiar feelings, those moments when you feel triggered or defensive. Ask yourself, what game might be at play here? What's the underlying dynamic? And most importantly, what choices can I make to create a more authentic and fulfilling experience?
It's about taking that deep dive into our own psyches, understanding those hidden motivations, and ultimately reclaiming our power to choose how we want to live
Yeah,
and relate to others.
absolutely.
This has been such an enlightening conversation. I mean, Burnet's Games People Play is a book that really stays with you, doesn't it?
It does.
It gives you a whole new lens for viewing human interaction.
It certainly does. I think the most powerful message it offers is that we're not stuck. We have the capacity to change, to evolve, to create more authentic and fulfilling relationships.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've gained some valuable insights.